The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital Pharmacy hummed their familiar tune, casting harsh shadows across the sterile white walls as 17-year-old Tamara Williams clutched her inhaler prescription with trembling fingers. She had been coming to this same pharmacy for 3 years, ever since her asthma had worsened. But today, something felt different. The air seemed thicker, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. Next, called the pharmacy technician, her voice echoing through the waiting area where a dozen patients sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. Tamara approached the counter, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. She had grown accustomed to the routine present her prescription. Wait for the medication to be prepared. Pay. And leave. Simple. Predictable. Safe. "I'm here to pick up my prescription for Tamara Williams," she said softly, sliding the paper across the counter. The technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, smiled warmly as she recognized the familiar face. "Of course. Honey, let me get that for you. How have you been feeling lately? Any issues with the new dosage?" Tamara shook her head, grateful for the genuine concern in the woman's voice. "It's been helping a lot. Thank you. I haven't had any major attacks since we increased the dose." She glanced around the pharmacy, noting the other patients waiting quietly, some reading magazines, others staring at their phones. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. But then she felt a presence behind her, looming and oppressive. The back of her neck prickled with an uncomfortable awareness, and she turned slightly to see a security officer standing just a few feet away, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed directly on her. Officer HOA Cops was a man in his late 40s, with a perpetual scowl that seemed etched permanently into his weathered face. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished to a mirror shine, and his hand rested casually on his radio as if he expected trouble at any moment. Tamara had seen him before during her visits, always patrolling the hospital corridors with the same stern expression. But he had never paid her any particular attention. Today, however, his gaze was laser-focused on her every movement, as if she were a suspect in some unspoken crime. She tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling creeping up her spine and focused on the pharmacist, who was now counting out her medication behind the counter. "Here you go, sweetie. Same instructions as before, 2 puffs when you feel an attack coming on. And don't forget to rinse your mouth afterward." The pharmacist handed her the small paper bag containing her inhaler, and Tamara fumbled in her purse for her wallet. Her mother had given her $40 that morning, enough to cover the copay, and maybe grab a snack from the hospital cafeteria afterward. As she pulled out the crumpled bills, she noticed that Officer Cops had moved closer, now standing directly behind her in line despite the fact that there were several other people waiting ahead of him. "Thank you," Tamara said to the pharmacist, completing her transaction and turning to leave. She had taken maybe 3 steps toward the exit when a firm hand landed on her shoulder, spinning her around with unexpected force. "Hold on there, young lady. I need to check your bag." The pharmacy fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones were lowered, and every eye in the room turned to witness the confrontation unfolding before them. Tamara's heart began to race, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid, the familiar precursor to an asthma attack. "I'm sorry. I just picked up my prescription. I haven't done anything wrong." Officer Copp's grip tightened on her shoulder, his face hardening into an expression of barely contained aggression. "You look suspicious. I've been watching you, and something doesn't add up. Empty your bag. Now." The words hit Tamara like a physical blow. Suspicious. She was a 17-year-old girl picking up medication for a chronic condition. She was wearing her school hoodie and jeans, carrying a worn backpack that had seen better days. What could possibly be suspicious about that? She glanced around the pharmacy, seeing the faces of other patients, some shocked, others uncomfortable, a few already reaching for their phones to record what was happening. "I don't understand. I just got my inhaler. I can show you the receipt." But Officer Cops was already moving, positioning himself between Tamara and the exit, his body language making it clear that she wasn't going anywhere until he was satisfied. The pharmacist behind the counter looked alarmed, her earlier warmth replaced by concern as she watched the situation escalate. "Ma'am, is there a problem? This young lady just picked up her regular prescription. She's been coming here for years." Officer Cops shot the pharmacist a look that could have frozen water. "I'm handling this. She fits the description of someone who's been shoplifting from the hospital gift shop, and I have every right to detain her for questioning." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that for a moment even Tamara wondered if she had somehow forgotten doing something wrong. But then, the absurdity of the situation hit her. She had come straight to the pharmacy from school, had spoken to no one except the pharmacist, and had touched nothing except her prescription and her wallet. There was no gift shop incident, no shoplifting, no crime of any kind. "That's not true. I came straight here from school. I haven't been to any gift shop." The officer's radio crackled to life, and he grabbed it with his free hand while maintaining his grip on Tamara's shoulder. "This is Cops. I've got a potential theft situation in the pharmacy. Requesting backup." The words echoed through the pharmacy like a death sentence. Backup. For what? For a teenager picking up her asthma medication? Tamara felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded an attack, and she instinctively reached for her inhaler. The movement was small, innocuous, but Officer Cops interpreted it as something far more sinister. "Don't reach for anything. Keep your hands where I can see them." His voice boomed through the pharmacy, and several elderly patients jumped in their seats. A woman with a walker gasped audibly, and a man in scrubs, who had been waiting for his prescription, stepped forward as if to intervene, then thought better of it and stepped back. "I was just getting my inhaler," Tamara whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own ragged breathing. "I have asthma. I'm having trouble breathing." But Officer Cops seemed to interpret her distress as further evidence of guilt. "Save it for someone who believes you. You people always have some sob story when you get caught." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "You people." The phrase landed with the weight of centuries of prejudice and assumption. And suddenly, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about shoplifting or suspicious behavior. This was about the color of her skin, the assumptions he had made the moment he laid eyes on her, the judgment he had passed before she had even spoken a word. The pharmacy door burst open, and Tamara's mother, Sandra Williams, rushed in with the frantic energy of a woman who had received a terrifying phone call. She was still in her work uniform from the hotel where she cleaned rooms, her name tag slightly askew from running through the hospital corridors. "Tamara, baby. What's going on? Are you okay?" Sandra's eyes quickly assessed the situation, her daughter being held by a security officer, the crowd of onlookers, the pharmacy staff looking helpless and concerned. Her maternal instincts kicked in immediately, and she stepped toward them with the determined gait of a mother protecting her child. "Excuse me, officer. What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Cops turned his attention to Sandra, his expression shifting slightly as he sized up this new element in the situation. "Your daughter was acting suspicious while picking up medication. I have reason to believe she may have been involved in theft from the hospital premises." Sandra's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a slow-burning anger that started in her chest and radiated outward. She had worked double shifts for 3 years to pay for her daughter's medical care, had brought Tamara to this same pharmacy dozens of times, had never once had any problems with the staff or security. Theft. What theft? She came here to pick up her inhaler, same as she does every month. What exactly are you accusing her of? The officer's story began to shift, the details becoming vaguer as he realized he was being challenged. There have been reports of shoplifting. She fits the description. I have every right to detain her for questioning. By now, several people in the pharmacy had their phones out, recording the interaction. The sight of the cameras seemed to make Officer Cops more agitated, and he raised his voice in an apparent attempt to regain control of the situation. Put those phones away. This is an official police investigation. But the phone stayed up, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of what was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. One of the recording witnesses, an elderly black woman who had been waiting for her heart medication, spoke up from her seat. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, and I saw everything. This child came in, got her medicine, paid for it, and tried to leave. She didn't do anything wrong. Other voices began to chime in, a chorus of witnesses who had seen the entire interaction unfold. The pharmacist, emboldened by the support of the other customers, stepped forward from behind the counter. Officer, I can confirm that this young lady has been a regular patient here for years. She picked up her prescribed medication, paid for it, and has her receipt. There's been no theft, no suspicious behavior, nothing that would warrant detention. Officer Cops's face was now flushed with embarrassment and anger. The situation had spiraled far beyond his control, and he was facing a room full of witnesses who had seen him fabricate accusations against an innocent teenager. His radio crackled again, and a voice came through asking for an update on the situation. This is Cops. False alarm. Situation under control. But the situation was far from under control. Sandra Williams had moved to her daughter's side, her arm protectively around Tamara's shoulders, as the teenager struggled to catch her breath. The stress of the confrontation was triggering a full-blown asthma attack, and Tamara's wheezing was becoming more pronounced. She needs her inhaler. Right now. Let her go. Sandra's voice carried the authority of a mother who would not be denied. And even Officer Cops seemed to recognize that preventing a teenager from accessing her life-saving medication would be indefensible, even to him. He released his grip on Tamara's shoulder, but remained standing in front of the exit, making it clear that he considered the matter far from resolved. Tamara fumbled with her inhaler, her hands shaking as she removed it from the paper bag. 2 quick puffs, and gradually her breathing began to stabilize. The pharmacy had fallen silent, except for the sound of her labored breathing and the quiet murmur of people discussing what they had witnessed. That's when the pharmacy door opened again, and Dr. Marcus Williams walked in. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, wearing a white coat with Dr. M. Williams, PharmD, Chief of Pharmacy, embroidered on the pocket. His presence immediately commanded attention, and even Officer Cops seemed to recognize that the dynamics of the situation had shifted dramatically. Dr. Williams took in the scene with the trained eye of someone accustomed to crisis management. His niece, clearly distressed and struggling with her asthma. His sister-in-law, Sandra, looking furious and protective. A security officer blocking the exit. A room full of witnesses with their phones out, recording everything. What exactly is going on here? His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. Officer Cops straightened slightly, perhaps recognizing the title on the white coat, perhaps simply responding to the commanding presence of someone who clearly belonged in this environment. Dr. Williams, sir, I was investigating reports of theft involving this individual. Dr. Williams' eyes narrowed as he processed the officer's words. This individual, you mean my niece, Tamara Williams, who has been a patient at this hospital for 3 years and has never had so much as a parking violation. The color drained from Officer Cops' face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Not only had he falsely accused an innocent teenager, but he had done so in front of her uncle, who happened to be the head of the very department where the incident had occurred. I didn't realize. I mean, there have been reports. Dr. Williams held up a hand, silencing the officer's stammering attempts at explanation. What reports? From whom? And what specific evidence did you have that my niece was involved in any wrongdoing? The questions came like surgical strikes, precise and devastating. Officer Cops opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing that he had no answers that would satisfy the man standing before him. The truth was that there had been no reports, no evidence, no basis for his actions other than his own prejudices and assumptions. Dr. Williams turned to his niece, his professional demeanor softening as he assessed her condition. Tamara, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Tamara shook her head, though her breathing was still somewhat labored. I'm okay. Uncle Marcus, I just came to get my inhaler, and She gestured toward Officer Cops, unable to finish the sentence. Dr. Williams nodded, then addressed the pharmacist, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm. Sarah, can you please provide me with a complete account of what happened here? I want every detail. The pharmacist, clearly relieved to have someone in authority taking control of the situation, quickly recounted the events: Tamara's arrival, the normal transaction, Officer Cops' intervention, the escalation of the confrontation, and the involvement of the other witnesses. As the story unfolded, Dr. Williams' expression grew increasingly serious. He was a man who had dedicated his career to patient care and safety, and the idea that someone under his care had been treated so poorly in his own department was both personally offensive and professionally unacceptable. Officer Cops, I'm going to need you to provide me with a written report detailing the specific reasons for your actions today. I want to know exactly what led you to detain my niece, what evidence you had of wrongdoing, and what protocols you followed. The officer's face had gone from red to pale, and beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning of the pharmacy. Dr. Williams, I was just doing my job. Hospital security requires vigilance, and sometimes mistakes happen. Mistakes? Dr. Williams' voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. You falsely accused a minor of theft, physically detained her without cause, prevented her from accessing her medication during a medical emergency, and used racial language in front of multiple witnesses. These aren't mistakes, officer. These are serious violations of hospital policy and potentially criminal acts. The pharmacy had become completely silent, except for the humming of the fluorescent lights and the quiet beeping of medical equipment in the distance. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something significant, a moment when authority was being challenged and justice was being demanded. One of the witnesses, the elderly woman who had first spoken up, approached Dr. Williams. Doctor, I recorded the whole thing on my phone. If you need it for your investigation, I'd be happy to provide it. Dr. Williams nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That would be very helpful. He turned back to Officer Cops, his expression unwavering. Officer, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the pharmacy immediately. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your supervisor and with hospital administration. Officer Cops looked as if he wanted to protest, but the combination of Dr. Williams' authority, the watching crowd, and the recording phones made any further confrontation impossible. He backed toward the door, his face a mask of barely contained anger and embarrassment. "This isn't over. I was just doing my job." Dr. Williams stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You're right. This isn't over. But your job, at least as it pertains to this hospital, most certainly is." The door swung shut behind Officer Cops, and the pharmacy seemed to exhale collectively. The tension that had filled the room began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of relief and vindication. Several of the witnesses approached Tamara and Sandra, offering words of support and expressing their outrage at what they had witnessed. Dr. Williams spent the next hour taking statements from everyone present, ensuring that the incident would be thoroughly documented. He personally called the hospital's chief of security, the director of human resources, and the CEO's office, making it clear that this was not a matter that would be swept under the rug or forgotten. 3 days later, the conference room on the 5th floor of St. Mary's Hospital was filled with people. Hospital administrators, department heads, legal counsel, and community leaders had all gathered to address the incident in the pharmacy. The video footage from the witnesses' phones had been reviewed, statements had been taken, and policies had been examined. Tamara sat between her mother and uncle, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention her case had received. Local news outlets had picked up the story, and the hashtag #JoshJusticeForTamara had begun trending on social media. The video of Officer Cops' aggressive behavior had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times, sparking conversations about racial profiling, abuse of authority, and the need for better training in healthcare settings. The hospital's CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Hartford, stood at the head of the table, her expression serious as she addressed the room. "We have conducted a thorough investigation into the incident that occurred in our pharmacy 3 days ago. I want to be clear that the behavior exhibited by Officer Cops is not representative of the values of St. Mary's Hospital, and we take full responsibility for the trauma experienced by Ms. Williams and her family." She paused, consulting her notes before continuing. "Officer Cops has been terminated from his position, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are implementing comprehensive bias training for all security personnel, revising our detention policies, and establishing a patient advocacy program to ensure that incidents like this never happen again." The room erupted in applause, and Tamara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The fear and humiliation of that day in the pharmacy had been replaced by something else, a sense of justice, of being heard and believed, of having her dignity restored. "Dr. Hartford continued, "We would also like to offer Ms. Williams a position as a patient advocate intern, if she's interested. Her experience, while traumatic, has highlighted important issues that we need to address, and we believe her voice and perspective would be invaluable in helping us create a more inclusive and respectful environment for all patients." Tamara looked up in surprise. She had never considered a career in healthcare advocacy, but the idea resonated with her. She thought about the other patients who might have experienced similar treatment, who might not have had an uncle in a position of authority, who might not have had witnesses willing to speak up on their behalf. I would like that very much. Thank you." The meeting concluded with commitments to ongoing dialogue, regular policy reviews, and a promise to establish St. Mary's Hospital as a model for inclusive healthcare. As the room emptied, Tamara found herself standing in the hallway with her mother and uncle, still processing everything that had happened. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Sandra asked, her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Tamara nodded. Though her emotions were complex, the trauma of the original incident would take time to heal, but she also felt a sense of empowerment, of having turned a negative experience into something positive and meaningful. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Uncle Marcus hadn't shown up. If those people hadn't recorded everything. If no one had spoken up. Doctor, Williams placed a hand on his niece's shoulder. But they did speak up. That's the thing about community. About standing together. One person's voice can be silenced, but a chorus of voices demanding justice that's much harder to ignore. 6 months later, Tamara Williams stood in the same pharmacy where her ordeal had begun, but now she wore a badge identifying her as a patient advocate intern. She had spent the intervening months working with hospital administration to implement new policies, conducting sensitivity training sessions, and serving as a liaison between patients and hospital staff. The pharmacy had been redesigned as part of the hospital's commitment to creating a more welcoming environment. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with warmer lighting. Comfortable seating areas had been added, and informational displays about patient rights were prominently featured throughout the space. As she walked through the pharmacy, greeting patients and staff, Tamara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The incident with Officer Cops had been traumatic, but it had also revealed something important about the power of community, the importance of speaking up against injustice, and the possibility of turning painful experiences into positive change. She thought about the letters she had received from other young people who had experienced similar situations, thanking her for her courage in speaking out. She thought about the policy changes that had been implemented, not just at St. Mary's, but at hospitals across the state, inspired by her story. She thought about the scholarship fund that had been established in her name to help other young people pursue careers in healthcare advocacy. Most of all, she thought about the lesson she had learned that day in the pharmacy, that standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult, even when it's scary, can make a difference not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. As she prepared to leave the pharmacy that evening, Tamara noticed a young Latino boy sitting nervously in one of the waiting chairs, clutching a prescription and looking around uncertainly. She approached him with a warm smile, introducing herself and asking if he needed any assistance. "Hi, I'm Tamara. I'm a patient advocate here. Is there anything I can help you with?" The boy looked up at her with relief, explaining that it was his first time at the hospital and he wasn't sure what to do. As Tamara guided him through the process, explaining his rights as a patient and ensuring he felt comfortable and respected, she realized that this was why she was here. This was the meaning that had emerged from her pain, the purpose that had grown from her trauma. The pharmacy closed that evening with the same quiet efficiency it always had. But something fundamental had changed. The culture of assumption and bias that had allowed Officer Cops to target Tamara had been replaced by a commitment to dignity, respect, and justice for all patients. It was a victory not just for Tamara Williams, but for everyone who believed that healthcare should be a place of healing, not harm. As Tamara walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, she passed the spot where Officer Cops had once stood, watching and judging. Now, a new security officer was stationed there, a young woman who nodded respectfully as Tamara passed. The difference was subtle, but significant, the shift from surveillance to service, from suspicion to support. Outside, the evening air was crisp and clean, and Tamara took a deep breath, filling her lungs completely. Her asthma was still a part of her life, but it no longer defined her limitations. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her power to make a difference. The girl who had walked into the pharmacy that day, afraid and alone, had become a young woman who walked out ready to change the world, one patient at a time. The lights of St. Mary's Hospital shone behind her as she walked toward her car, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Somewhere in those halls, other patients were receiving care. Other families were finding healing, and other young people were discovering that their voices mattered. The circle of justice had been closed, but the work of building a more equitable world continued. As she drove home, Tamara thought about tomorrow's scheduled meetings with hospital administrators, training sessions with security staff, and conversations with patients who needed an advocate. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference, work that honored the courage of everyone who had spoken up that day in the pharmacy when injustice had tried to silence her voice. The road ahead was illuminated by her headlights, stretching into the distance with promise and possibility. Behind her, the hospital grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the impact of what had happened there would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and changing hearts for years to come. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had been awakened to the power of standing together against prejudice and discrimination. In the end, the story of Tamara Williams was not just about one teenager's confrontation with authority, but about the broader human capacity for growth, redemption, and positive change. It was about the difference one person can make when they refuse to accept injustice, and about the power of community to transform pain into purpose. It was a story that would be told and retold, inspiring others to find their own voices and stand up for what is right, no matter how difficult the circumstances. The pharmacy at St. Mary's Hospital continued to serve patients every day, but now it served them with the knowledge that every person who walked through its doors deserved to be treated with dignity, respect, and compassion. It was a small victory in the larger struggle for justice and equality, but it was a victory nonetheless, one that had been won not through violence or revenge, but through truth, courage, and the unwavering belief that things could be better. And they were.